We live in an era that has declared war on time itself. Every moment must be optimized, every second accounted for, every pause justified. The contemporary subject exists in a state of perpetual acceleration, always rushing toward the next task, the next notification, the next dopamine hit. We have become merchants of our own time, selling it in ever smaller increments to the logic of productivity and efficiency. What we have lost in this frenetic exchange is not merely leisure or rest, but something far more fundamental: the capacity to truly experience time as duration, as depth, as something other than a resource to be exploited. The acceleration of modern life is not simply a matter of doing more things faster. It represents a transformation in the very structure of temporality itself. Time has been colonized by the demands of production and performance. It has been fragmented into discrete, measurable units that can be optimized and monetized. The neoliberal subject internalizes this logic completely, becoming their own entrepreneur, their own taskmaster, their own most ruthless manager. We no longer need external authority to discipline us because we have learned to discipline ourselves with perfect efficiency. The smartphone becomes the instrument of this self-surveillance, constantly reminding us of what we have not yet accomplished, what we might be missing, what productivity gains still lie untapped. This acceleration creates what we might call a temporal paradox. Despite all our time-saving technologies, we experience a profound sense of temporal scarcity. Time seems to be slipping away from us ever more rapidly. The more we try to save time, the less of it we seem to have. This is because acceleration does not give us more time. It merely increases the number of events that occur within any given temporal frame. Our lives become densely packed with experiences, information, and stimuli, yet somehow emptier for all this fullness. We skim across the surface of existence, never dwelling long enough in any moment to extract its essence, its meaning, its gift. The contemporary regime of time is fundamentally hostile to anything that requires duration. Contemplation, reflection, genuine thought, deep relationships, the cultivation of skill and wisdom, all these demand what our age can no longer provide. Time that unfolds slowly, time that lingers, time that allows for repetition and ritual. Instead, we are offered the perpetual novelty of the new, the constant stimulation of information, the addictive cycle of production and consumption. The attention economy feeds on our inability to sustain focus, to remain with anything long enough for it to transform us. We become tourists in our own lives, taking quick snapshots of experience, but never truly inhabiting the landscapes we traverse. What Byung-Chul Han identifies in his philosophical work is that this temporal regime is not merely exhausting. It is a form of violence. It is a violence that does not come from external oppression, but from the internalized compulsion to optimize ourselves, to exploit our own potential fully, to never waste a moment. This violence is particularly insidious because it presents itself as freedom. We are told we can do anything, be anything, achieve anything if only we work hard enough, manage our time efficiently enough, hustle relentlessly enough. But this freedom is a trap. It binds us more thoroughly than any external chains because we become complicit in our own exploitation. The burnout society that emerges from this logic is characterized by a specific form of exhaustion. It is not the exhaustion that comes from external demands or physical labor, but the exhaustion that comes from the pressure to constantly perform, to constantly achieve, to constantly become. The contemporary subject is tired not from doing too much, but from the impossibility of ever doing enough. There is no endpoint to self-optimization, no moment when we can finally rest and say we have arrived. The goalpost constantly moves, the standards constantly rise, and we run ever faster on a treadmill that goes nowhere. To recover what we have lost requires nothing less than a fundamental reorientation toward time itself. It requires us to recognize that acceleration is not progress, that productivity is not fulfillment, That constant activity is not genuine living. Taking time, genuinely taking it, reclaiming it from the demands of production and performance, becomes an act of resistance. It is a refusal of the logic that would reduce every moment to its utility, every experience to its productivity value. To take time is to insist that some things cannot be rushed, that depth requires duration, that meaning emerges from lingering rather than from speed. The art of taking time begins with recognizing that we have forgotten how to wait, how to pause, how to let things ripen in their own season. We have become impatient with any process that cannot be accelerated, any experience that cannot be compressed. We want instant results, immediate gratification, rapid transformation. But the most profound dimensions of human existence resist such compression. Love cannot be rushed. Grief cannot be abbreviated. Wisdom cannot be downloaded. These experiences require us to submit to rhythms that are not of our own making, to temporalities that exceed our control. In traditional societies, time was structured by ritual and repetition. The same festivals returned each year. The same prayers were spoken each day. The same stories were told across generations. This repetition was not monotonous, but meaningful. It created a sense of continuity and depth, a feeling that one was participating in something larger than oneself, something that transcended the merely individual. The modern subject, by contrast, exists in a perpetual state of novelty seeking. We are addicted to the new, constantly hunting for fresh stimulation, new information, novel experiences. But this addiction to novelty prevents us from going deep into anything. We sample everything and master nothing. We know a little about much and have profound understanding of almost nothing. The contemplative traditions understood something we have forgotten. That true knowledge comes not from accumulating more information, but from dwelling deeply with what we already know. The monastic practice of Lectio Divina involved reading the same sacred texts over and over, not to extract new information, but to allow the words to work on the soul, to transform consciousness through repetition and meditation. This approach to knowledge stands in stark contrast to our contemporary information culture, where we scroll through endless feeds, consuming vast quantities of content, but retaining almost nothing, understanding even less. What we have lost, above all, is the capacity for what Han calls lingering attention. We have trained ourselves in distraction, in the rapid shifting of focus from one stimulus to another. Our attention has become restless, shallow, incapable of sustained engagement. This is not accidental, but structural. The digital platforms that mediate so much of our experience are designed to capture and fragment our attention, to keep us scrolling, clicking, refreshing. They profit from our distraction, from our inability to focus, from the perpetual incompleteness of our engagement with any single thing. To recover the art of taking time, we must first recognize that slowness is not inefficiency, but a different mode of being entirely. There is a tempo of thought that cannot be rushed, a rhythm of creativity that requires incubation and gestation. The truly original insight does not come from processing more information faster, but from allowing ideas to ferment in the unconscious, to make unexpected connections, to mature slowly into genuine understanding. The pressure to produce constantly, to publish or perish, to demonstrate measurable outputs, all this militates against the kind of deep thinking that takes time. The cult of busyness that dominates contemporary culture is, in many ways, a defense against the anxiety of confronting ourselves. When we're constantly occupied, constantly distracted, we need never face the fundamental questions of existence. We need never ask what our lives mean, what we truly value, who we are beneath all our activities and achievements. Busyness becomes a kind of existential avoidance, a way of filling the void without ever acknowledging its presence. We fear silence, fear stillness, fear the unstructured time in which uncomfortable truths might surface. But it is precisely in such moments of pause, of genuine leisure, that we might rediscover ourselves. The Greek concept of skol, from which our word school derives, meant not work but leisure, free time devoted to contemplation and learning for its own sake, not for any utilitarian purpose. This kind of leisure is not the same as mere rest or entertainment. It is an active engagement with ideas, with beauty, with questions that have no immediate practical application. It is time spent not producing but being, not achieving but contemplating. The recovery of such time requires us to create structures of resistance against the acceleration imperative. We must consciously carve out spaces in our lives where the logic of productivity does not penetrate, where we are not trying to optimize or achieve, but simply to be present. This might take the form of regular practices, meditation, long walks, reading for pleasure rather than information, conversations that serve no purpose beyond connection itself. These activities are revolutionary precisely because they refuse to justify themselves in terms of utility or output. The resistance to acceleration is also a resistance to the tyranny of the possible. In a culture that tells us we can do anything, we feel obligated to do everything. Every choice to commit to one path feels like a loss of infinite other possibilities. We become paralyzed by optionality, unable to commit because commitment means foreclosing alternatives. But depth is only possible through limitation, through the willingness to say no to most things so that we can say yes completely to a few things. The phenomenon Han describes as the transparency society is intimately connected to our disordered relationship with time. In our age, everything must be made visible, quantifiable, and immediately accessible. We track our steps, monitor our sleep, measure our productivity, display our lives on social media for constant evaluation. This regime of total visibility leaves no room for the opaque, the hidden, the slow processes of transformation that occur beyond the reach of measurement. Mystery and depth require a certain darkness, a withdrawal from the scrutinizing gaze of perpetual surveillance. But we have traded mystery for metrics, depth for data, contemplation for constant visibility. The digital architecture of our age is fundamentally opposed to the temporality required for genuine experience. Algorithms feed us content based on our past preferences, creating echo chambers that prevent genuine surprise or transformation. The endless scroll of social media creates a sensation of movement without actual progression, stimulation without satisfaction. We experience what Han calls the hell of the same, a claustrophobic repetition disguised as variety, where everything is slightly different yet fundamentally identical. We consume content endlessly but are never truly nourished by it. We communicate constantly but rarely achieve genuine communion with another person. The exhaustion that characterizes our age is not simply physical but spiritual. It is the exhaustion of a self that has become its own project, constantly working on itself, optimizing itself, branding itself for maximum market appeal. The neoliberal subject experiences themselves as human capital, an asset to be developed and deployed strategically. This transforms even leisure into a form of work. Self-care becomes another task on the endless to-do list. Vacation becomes an opportunity for the perfect Instagram post. Hobbies must be justified in terms of their contribution to personal growth or professional networking. What we need is not better time management, but a fundamentally different relationship to time. We need to recover what Han calls the time of the other, time that interrupts our plans, that disrupts our schedules, that comes from beyond our control. This might be the time demanded by a crying child, by a friend in crisis, by an unexpected encounter that derails our agenda. Such interruptions are often experienced as obstacles to productivity, annoyances that prevent us from accomplishing our goals. But there are also opportunities for genuine experience, moments when we are forced out of our self-enclosed projects and into relationship with otherness. The recovery of temporal depth requires us to resist the logic of multitasking, which fragments consciousness and prevents us from ever being fully present to any single thing. When we multitask, we are never truly here, never fully attending to what is before us. We develop what might be called a divided attention, simultaneously present everywhere and nowhere. The practice of doing one thing at a time, of giving our full attention to whatever is at hand, becomes a radical gesture in a culture of permanent distraction. There's also a political dimension to the recovery of time. The demand for constant availability, the expectation that we will respond immediately to messages regardless of the hour, the erosion of boundaries between work time and personal time. All these represent an encroachment of capital into every corner of existence. To take time, to be unavailable, to refuse the demand for instant response, is to assert a boundary against this totalizing logic. It is to insist that some dimensions of life cannot and should not be colonized by the imperatives of production and performance. The practice of what we might call contemplative resistance involves cultivating activities and rhythms that run counter to acceleration. Reading long, difficult books that require sustained attention. Engaging in crafts and skills that cannot be rushed, where mastery comes only through patient repetition over years. Maintaining relationships that deepen slowly through accumulated shared time rather than through intense but brief encounters. Growing food in gardens where plants ripen according to their own seasons, not according to our convenience. These practices are not escapist retreats from reality, but ways of inhabiting reality more fully, more deeply, more humanly. The recovery of what Han calls narrative time is essential to this project. Narrative time is the time of stories, which have beginnings, middles, and ends, which unfold according to their own internal logic rather than being fragmented into disconnected moments. Our lives need narrative coherence to be meaningful. We need to experience ourselves as characters in stories that develop over time, that accumulate significance, that move toward resolution. But the fragmenting logic of digital culture undermines narrative. We experience our lives as a series of disconnected presents, status updates without plot, images without story. To resist this fragmentation, we must consciously cultivate practices of integration and reflection. We must regularly pause to ask where we have come from and where we are going, to connect the dots between disparate experiences, to extract meaning from the raw material of our days. This requires setting aside time for journaling, for conversation, for the kind of unhurried reflection that allows patterns to emerge and significance to crystallize. The philosophy of slowness that emerges from Han's critique is not simply a romanticization of the past or a nostalgic longing for pre-modern rhythms. It is a recognition that certain human goods, wisdom, love, beauty, meaning, require temporal conditions that our age systematically destroys. These goods cannot be produced on demand or acquired through efficient processes. They emerge only when we create the conditions for their appearance, which means above all creating temporal space that is not colonized by instrumental rationality, by the calculus of productivity and optimization. Consider the difference between knowing about something and genuinely understanding it. We can know about meditation by reading articles and watching videos, accumulating information quickly and efficiently. But to understand meditation requires practicing it over months and years, submitting to its discipline, allowing it to gradually reshape our consciousness. The knowing is fast, the understanding is slow. Our culture privileges the former and has largely lost patience with the latter. We want the benefits without the practice, the destination without the journey, the achievement without the process. The same logic applies to relationships. We can know many people superficially through social media, accumulating hundreds or thousands of connections. But deep friendship requires time, extended, unstructured time spent together. Conversations that meander without agenda, shared silences that need not be filled, the slow accumulation of trust through countless small moments of presence and vulnerability. Such friendships cannot be efficiently networked or strategically cultivated. They grow organically at their own pace, often in ways that surprise us. What Han identifies is that the acceleration of life produces a specific form of poverty, not material poverty, but temporal and experiential poverty. We become poor in time, poor in experience, poor in the capacity for deep engagement. This poverty exists alongside, and indeed is often produced by, material abundance. We have access to more information, more entertainment, more options than any previous generation, yet we feel impoverished in our capacity to truly enjoy or make sense of this abundance. The wealth of stimulation produces a poverty of experience. The art of taking time, then, is ultimately an art of living well. It requires us to distinguish between mere activity and genuine action, between busyness and purposeful engagement, between the accumulation of experiences and the cultivation of wisdom. It demands that we develop what might be called an aesthetic of existence, where we attend to the quality and texture of our experience rather than simply to its quantity or productivity. This aesthetic sensibility recognizes that some moments are valuable precisely because they're useless, because they serve no purpose beyond themselves, because they offer us the gift of simply being rather than constantly becoming. The practice of Sabbath, found in various forms across religious traditions, embodies this wisdom. It creates a regular rhythm of withdrawal from productive activity, a time when we are forbidden to work, to optimize, to achieve. This prohibition is not a burden, but a liberation. It frees us from the compulsion to constantly produce, giving us permission to simply exist, to rest, to contemplate. In a culture where we feel we must always justify our existence through achievement, such permission is revolutionary. To recover the art of taking time in practical terms requires us to make concrete decisions about how we structure our days and lives. It might mean turning off notifications, establishing technology-free zones or times, protecting certain hours for undisturbed focus or rest. It might mean saying no more often, recognizing that every yes to something new is implicitly a no to depth with what we have already committed to. It might mean choosing quality over quantity in our relationships, our work, our consumption patterns. But beyond these practical strategies, what is ultimately required is a transformation of consciousness, a shift in how we understand ourselves and our place in time. We must cease to experience ourselves primarily as productive units, as human capital to be optimized. We must recover a sense of ourselves as beings who participate in larger rhythms, natural, cosmic, social, that exceed our individual control and purposes. We must relearn humility before time, accepting that we cannot master or transcend it, but can only learn to inhabit it more gracefully. The recovery of what we have lost begins with the simple, radical act of pausing, of stopping, of creating a gap in the relentless flow of activity and stimulation. In that pause, in that silence, in that moment of doing nothing, we might rediscover what it means to be human, not as producers or consumers, not as optimized and efficient machines, but as beings capable of wonder, of depth, of presence. The art of taking time is ultimately the art of being fully alive, of experiencing the richness and complexity of existence, rather than merely skimming across its surface in our rush toward an ever-receding future. What Han offers us is not a program or a solution, but an invitation to slow down, to resist, to reclaim our time and our lives from the forces that would reduce us to instruments of production. Whether we accept this invitation may well determine not only the quality of our individual lives, but the future of human flourishing itself.